Hello everyone, welcome to my data science and AI channel. My name is Ajitesh and I'm here to bring you the tutorials, latest insights and innovations in the field of data science and AI. In this video, I'm going to speak about one of the most fundamental concepts in machine learning that's called gradient descent. So if you're a beginner looking to understand the basics, you have come to the right place. Before we move on, I would request you to subscribe my channel for more such informative video in the future. So let's get started. So before we go and understand what is gradient descent, we need to understand why in the first place even if we need this algorithm. Now, as we all know that when we are working with machine learning model, there's always a need to have a model with a very high accuracy. Now, for a model to have a very high accuracy, the difference between the outcome of the model and the actual outcome, this needs to be as less as possible. This difference is calculated using what we call as a cost or the loss function. Now, in the ideal scenario, what we need is as less cost or as less loss as possible, which means what we need is the value of loss function to be as less as possible for any given input. In order to have the less loss for any given input, what we need is to minimize the cost function associated with the model during the model training phase. And in order to minimize the cost function, what we need is an optimization algorithm. And one of the most popular optimization algorithm is gradient descent. So now let's look into what exactly is the gradient descent. In order to understand the gradient descent algorithm, we first need to understand what is gradient. In simple words, a gradient is a vector quantity that has magnitude and the direction. Now we need to understand what is it that we are speaking about magnitude and the direction. When we say gradient, we say gradient of a function at any given point. So when we talk about the magnitude of a gradient of function at any given point, we are essentially talking about the steepest increase of the function at that point with respect to the different variables or the dimension. Similarly, for the direction of gradient, we are talking about the direction of steepest increase with respect to the different dimensions. Let's understand it with the help of this plot. This is a plot of cost function versus parameters vector. So if we have a cost function with three different parameters, when we see here parameters, we are saying all the three different parameters. So this is a cost function, and if you see there is a red line, it is a tangent at that point where we want to calculate the gradient. Now this is a gradient which represents the direction of the steepest increase of the function at this point. This is what is called as a gradient. If we have to now talk about what is gradient from the mathematical perspective, essentially gradient is about a partial derivative of function with respect to the different variables. So if we have a function with three different variables x, y, z, when we talk about the gradient, it will be having the rate of change or steepest increase for all these three different variables, and the way to calculate is go and take the partial derivatives of the function with respect to these three different variables. So that's what it is about gradient. Now let's go and understand the gradient descent algorithm. Gradient descent is an optimization algorithm for minimizing the cost function. A moment before, we have understood what is gradient. Now let's understand the gradient descent algorithm. I'm showing here a plot which is a plot of cost function versus the weight vector or the parameter vector. If you see the orange curved line, this represents the cost function. So when we start optimizing the cost function, as a first step, we go and initialize our weight vector or the parameter vector. That is called as initial weight or initial set of parameters. After that, what we do is we go and calculate the gradient at that point. Now there are different ways of calculating the gradient at any given point of the cost function. One of the technique is calculate the gradient for entire data set. That's called as batch gradient descent. The second technique is calculate the gradient for each data point and then adjust the parameters. The third method is calculate the gradient for a set of data points and then adjust the parameters. Ask is we need to minimize the cost function by adjusting the parameters such that the cost function becomes lesser and lesser. How do we go and adjust the parameters? So what we do is once we have calculated the gradient based on different methods that we are working with, either batch gradient or stochastic gradient or the mini batch gradient descent, we go and multiply the value of gradient with the learning step. Out here on the plot it is shown as incremental step, and then we go and subtract the value of this product with the existing value of weight vector. This is how the value of the parameters are adjusted. What we then do is we go and take the number of iterations and we continue to adjust the parameters for those many number of iterations. This is what is called as gradient descent algorithm. Now let's look at what are some of the challenges of gradient descent algorithm. So depending upon how we initialize the weight vector or the parameter vector and what is the value of incremental or the learning step, there are chances that we can land up at the local minima when we are really optimizing the cost function. This is one of the most commonly seen challenges working with the gradient descent algorithm. And to address this challenge, that's where we have the different variations of gradient descent algorithm, one of which is stochastic gradient descent algorithm, in which we go and update the gradient after each data set. And the other one is mini batch gradient descent algorithm, where we go and randomly pick the mini batches of data and then update the weights. We go and calculate the gradient and then updates the weight vector accordingly. We'll go and look into the details of both of this kind of gradient descent in the future video. So that is what I had to speak about the gradient descent algorithm in this video. Hope you liked what you have learned in this video. If you have any questions regarding any aspect of gradient descent algorithm, I would request you to put your questions in the comment box and I would attempt to answer them as soon as possible. Thank you very much for watching this video. Have a nice day.